The bullet grazed past Loretta Whitmore's head close enough that she felt the heat of it, and she did not flinch because, at 6 feet 2 inches tall, she had learned long ago that the world was full of things meant to cut her down to size. The bank robber's horse reared as the sheriff's men returned fire, and Loretta found herself pressed against the wooden storefront of Harrison's General Store, watching the chaos unfold in Tahlequah's dusty Main Street on that sweltering July afternoon in 1878. The Indian Territory town had seen its share of violence, situated as it was near the Cherokee Nation capital, but this particular Tuesday had started peaceful enough. She had been buying fabric for new curtains when the 3 masked men burst out of the Territorial Bank with sacks of money and guns blazing. "Get down, you fool woman!" Someone shouted at her, but Loretta stayed upright, her back against the wall, her green eyes tracking the movements of horses and men with the same calm assessment she applied to everything in life. Getting down would not make her any safer, and besides, at her height, crouching always made her knees ache something fierce. The shooting stopped as quickly as it started. 2 of the robbers lay dead in the street, their blood mixing with the red Oklahoma dirt. The third had escaped, thundering south toward the Arkansas River on a paint horse that kicked up a trail of dust visible for miles. "Anyone hurt?" Sheriff Coleman called out, his weathered face scanning the crowd of townspeople emerging from their hiding spots. "Just my pride," old Mr. Harrison muttered, brushing dirt off his apron. "Dove behind my own counter like a scared rabbit." Loretta stepped away from the storefront, smoothing down her simple blue cotton dress. The fabric strained slightly across her shoulders, custom-made like all her clothes had to be. Nothing in the catalogs ever fit a woman built like her, all long limbs and height that made her tower over most men in town. "Miss Whitmore, you all right?" The sheriff asked, tipping his hat to her with the distant politeness most people used when addressing her. Polite but not friendly, respectful but not warm. "I am fine, Sheriff. Thank you for asking." She collected her wrapped parcel of fabric from where it had fallen and made her way down the wooden sidewalk toward the boarding house where she lived. People stepped aside to let her pass, some with barely concealed stares, others with the studied indifference of those who had grown accustomed to the strange sight of such a tall woman walking among them. Loretta had lived in Tahlequah for 3 years, ever since her father died and left her with nothing but debts and the need to make her own way. She worked as a seamstress and occasionally as a teacher when the schoolhouse needed someone tall enough to reach the high windows for cleaning. It was not the life she had imagined as a girl, but it was hers, and she had learned to hold her head high even when the whispers followed her like shadows. "Too tall for a woman," they said. What man would want to look up at his wife? They wondered. "Unnatural," some of the older church ladies clucked. At 24 years old, Loretta had heard it all. She had watched girls 5 years her junior marry and start families while she remained conspicuously alone. She had endured the pitying looks from married women and the uncomfortable avoidance from unmarried men who seemed to take her height as a personal affront to their masculinity. The boarding house sat at the edge of town, a 2-story structure with peeling white paint and a front porch that sagged slightly to the left. Mrs. Kowalski, the proprietor, was sweeping the steps when Loretta arrived. "Heard there was trouble at the bank," the older Polish woman said, her accent still thick despite 20 years in America. 3 robbers, 2 dead, 1 got away. "This territory," Mrs. Kowalski sighed. "Always something. You be careful, Loretta. Tall woman like you stand out." "Make yourself a target." "I always am anyway," Loretta said softly, climbing the steps to the porch. "Might as well stand out for being in the wrong place at the wrong time as for being too tall to ignore." She went to her small room on the second floor, set down her parcel, and moved to the window that overlooked the main street. From here, she could see the whole town spread out below, the mix of Cherokee and white residents going about their business, the dust settling back onto the road, life continuing as it always did after violence passed through like a summer storm. That evening, she sat by lamplight and sewed new curtains for Mrs. Henderson, who wanted them finished before her daughter's wedding next month. The fabric was a pretty cream color with small blue flowers. Loretta's stitches were neat and precise, her long fingers surprisingly delicate despite their size. A knock at her door interrupted her work. "Loretta," Mrs. Kowalski called, "you have visitor downstairs." She set aside her sewing with a frown. Visitors were rare for her. When she descended the narrow staircase, she found Sheriff Coleman waiting in the boarding house parlor, hat in hands. "Evening, Miss Whitmore. Sorry to bother you after the excitement today." "What can I do for you, Sheriff?" "That third robber, the one who got away. We think he might be holed up somewhere nearby. He took a bullet to the shoulder before he rode off, and there was a blood trail heading southeast. I am putting together a posse to track him come first light." He shifted his weight, looking uncomfortable. "Thing is, I need someone who knows the territory down by the river bottoms, and I hear you used to go walking down that way with your father before he passed." Loretta considered this. Her father had been an amateur naturalist, always wandering the creeks and forests cataloging plants and birds. She had accompanied him on many of those expeditions, learning the land, learning to move quietly and observe carefully. "You want me to guide a posse?" "Not exactly. I just need you to draw me a map, mark the places where a wounded man might take shelter. Caves, abandoned homesteads, that sort of thing." She nodded slowly. "I can do that. When do you need it?" "Tonight, if possible. We ride at dawn." Loretta fetched paper and pencil from her room and spent the next hour sketching out the terrain she remembered, marking locations, noting which creek crossings were passable and which were treacherous with mud. The sheriff watched her work with growing respect. "You have got quite the memory, Miss Whitmore." "I pay attention to things, Sheriff. When you are as tall as I am, you learn to notice the world around you because the world certainly notices you." He took the map when she finished, studying it by lamplight. "This is good work. Real good." "Thank you. I hope you find him." "We will. Man like that cannot get far with a bullet wound." He paused at the door. "You know, Miss Whitmore, you would make a fine deputy if things were different, got a good head on your shoulders and steady nerves. Not many people keep their composure during a shootout like you did today." "Things are not different, though," Loretta said gently, "but I appreciate the sentiment." After he left, she returned to her sewing, but her mind wandered to the escaped robber and the posse that would hunt him at dawn. She thought about violence and safety, about how neither could be measured in inches or feet, despite what people seem to think about women and their proper place in the world. The next morning, she woke to the sound of horses and men gathering in the street below. She dressed quickly and watched from her window as the posse assembled, a dozen men armed with rifles and determination. They rode out just as the sun broke over the eastern hills, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. Loretta went about her day as usual. She delivered the finished curtains to Mrs. Henderson, who paid her and immediately began talking about her daughter's upcoming nuptials. "Such a beautiful girl, my Alice, and her young man is so handsome and tall enough too. 6 feet even. None of this nonsense of a woman towering over her husband." Mrs. Henderson's eyes flicked to Loretta with barely concealed meaning. "Alice is very fortunate," Loretta said evenly. "I wish her every happiness. You know, Loretta, if you would just not wear those heeled boots, you might seem a bit shorter, more approachable for the gentleman." I wear flat boots, Mrs. Henderson. I have for years. Oh, the older woman looked flustered. Well, perhaps if you hunch just a little. I will not hunch. Good day, Mrs. Henderson. She left before anger could take root, walking back toward town with long strides that ate up the distance. The injustice of it burned in her chest. She was too tall, too this, too that. Always too much of something that could not be changed, that should not need to be changed. The general store was busy when she arrived to buy thread. She stood in line behind 3 other women who were deep in conversation about the bank robbery. I heard the one who got away was the youngest of the Dalton cousins, one woman said. No, someone told me it was a Cherokee boy gone bad. Whoever he is, Sheriff Coleman will bring him back, dead or alive. Loretta made her purchase and was leaving when she collided with someone coming through the door. Her packages tumbled from her arms, spools of thread rolling across the wooden floor in every direction. I apologize, I was not watching where I was going, she said, kneeling to gather the scattered items. No, that was entirely my fault, miss. I should have been paying better attention. The voice was deep and warm, with an accent that marked him as coming from further west, maybe Texas or New Mexico. Loretta looked up and found herself meeting the eyes of a man who was looking up at her, even though she was kneeling on the floor. He stood perhaps 5 feet 8 or 9, broad-shouldered and lean, with sun-weathered skin and dark hair that needed cutting. His eyes were a striking blue-gray, like storm clouds over the prairie, and he was smiling at her with genuine friendliness that made something in her chest flutter unexpectedly. "Let me help you with those," he said, crouching down to collect the errant spools. When he handed them back to her, their fingers brushed briefly, and that flutter happened again. They both stood, and now she towered over him by a good 5 or 6 inches. She waited for the inevitable moment when his smile would fade, when he would register her height and make some excuse to move away. She had seen it happen countless times before, but he kept smiling, his eyes never leaving hers. "I am William Vaughn," he said, extending his hand. "Most folks call me Will. I just arrived in town this morning looking for work at one of the ranches hereabouts. Loretta Whitmore." She shook his hand, surprised by the firmness of his grip, the calluses that spoke of hard work. "Pleased to meet you, Miss Whitmore. And again, I apologize for nearly bowling you over. I was distracted by this town. It is quite something, with the Cherokee influence and all. I have never been to Indian Territory before." "It takes some getting used to," she said carefully, waiting for him to make his excuses and leave. He did not leave. Instead, he stood there in the doorway of the general store, still smiling at her like she was the most normal thing in the world. "Are you from Tahlequah originally?" he asked. "No, I came here 3 years ago from Missouri. My father was looking for a fresh start, and the territory offered opportunities. Mine too. Well, not opportunities exactly. I come from a ranch in Texas that got foreclosed after the drought of '76. Been working my way north ever since, taking jobs where I can find them." Someone cleared their throat behind them, and they realized they were blocking the doorway. Will stepped aside, holding the door open for her, still talking like they were old friends. "I was about to get some lunch at that little restaurant I passed on the way here. Would you care to join me, Miss Whitmore? My treat, as an apology for the collision." Loretta stared at him, searching for the joke, the trick, the inevitable cruelty. But his expression remained open and hopeful, nothing more complicated than a man asking a woman to share a meal. "I suppose I could," she heard herself say. They walked together down the street to Mee's Kitchen, a small establishment run by a Creek woman who served the best venison stew in the territory. Loretta was acutely aware of the stares that followed them, the whispers that started as soon as they passed. Look at that. The giant woman found someone. Poor fellow probably cannot tell how tall she is in all the confusion of a new town. If Will heard any of it, he gave no sign. He chatted easily about his journey north, about the ranches he had worked, the country he had seen. He asked her questions about Tahlequah, about the Cherokee Nation, about her work as a seamstress. At Me's kitchen, they took a table by the window, and he pulled out her chair before sitting across from her. The table was small enough that their knees nearly touched underneath it. "This is nice," Will said, looking around at the modest interior with its rough-hewn tables and the smell of cooking meat drifting from the kitchen. "Reminds me of home before we lost the ranch." "What will you do now?" Loretta asked. "If you find work here, I mean." "Work hard, save money, maybe someday start again. A man can make something of himself in this territory, I hear. Land is still available if you know where to look and do not mind working it." Me herself came to take their order, her dark eyes moving between Loretta and Will with undisguised curiosity. Loretta ordered the stew, and Will asked for the same plus cornbread. When Me left, Will leaned back in his chair and regarded Loretta with a directness that should have been uncomfortable but somehow was not. "Can I ask you something, Miss Whitmore?" "You can ask." "Why do people keep staring at us? Is there something on my face? Did I miss a spot shaving this morning?" Despite herself, Loretta laughed. It burst out of her unexpectedly, drawing more stares from the other diners. "No, you are fine. They are staring because I am with you, or rather because you are with me." "Why would that cause a stir?" She gestured at herself, at the way she had to sit carefully to fit her legs under the table, at how her head came level with the top of the window even while seated. "Because I am too tall, Mr. Vaughn. Too tall for a woman, too tall for a wife, too tall for any man in this town to consider courting. That is what they tell me at any rate. And here you are, shorter than me by several inches, having lunch with me in public. It is quite the scandal." Will was quiet for a moment, processing this. Then he did something that surprised her more than anything that had happened so far. He laughed, a rich, genuine sound that made her want to join in. "Well, that is about the silliest thing I have ever heard, and I once met a man in Abilene who was convinced the earth was flat and hollow and full of lizard people. You are tall, yes. So what? That is just a fact, like saying the sky is blue or grass is green. It does not make you two anything. You say that now, but wait until you have been in town longer. You will hear what people think. You will understand that a man is supposed to be taller than the woman he is with. It is the natural order of things, apparently. Natural according to who? I have been short all my life, Miss Whitmore. 5'9" on a good day with thick socks. My father was 6'4" and I stopped growing when I was 16. I know what it is like to not fit people's expectations, but I learned something important along the way. What is that? That other people's expectations are not my problem. I cannot change my height any more than you can change yours, so I just live my life and let them think what they want. Me brought their food, and they ate in companionable silence for a few minutes. The stew was thick and rich, full of vegetables from Me's garden behind the restaurant. "This is delicious," Will said. "Best meal I have had in weeks. Me is an excellent cook. I eat here at least once a week when I can afford it. You mentioned you work as a seamstress. Do you enjoy it?" "I am good at it," Loretta said carefully. "I suppose that is not quite the same as enjoying it, but it is honest work, and it keeps me fed and housed." What would you do if you could do anything? No one had ever asked her that before. She thought about it, watching the street through the window, the dust and the people and the endless blue sky stretching above it all. "I think I would explore," she said slowly. "My father used to take me on long walks through the wilderness, teaching me about plants and animals and the land. I loved those days. I loved learning the secrets of the world, the way a creek will tell you where it is before you see it, the way different trees smell different in different seasons. I would want to keep doing that, keep learning, maybe even write it all down someday. That sounds wonderful, Will said, and he meant it. She could hear it in his voice, see it in his eyes. They finished their meal and walked back toward the boarding house, taking the long way that followed the edge of town. Will walked beside her with his hands in his pockets, whistling softly. "Where are you staying, Mr. Vaughn? Please call me Will. And I am camping just outside town until I figure out my next move. There is a spot by the river that someone suggested, near a stand of cottonwoods. That is pretty country down there. Would you show me sometime? I mean, if you are not too busy with your sewing. I would appreciate a local's perspective on the area." There it was again, that fluttering in her chest. He wanted to see her again. This strange, smiling cowboy who did not seem to care about her height wanted to spend more time with her. "I could do that," she said. "Perhaps this Sunday after church. I usually have the afternoon free." "Sunday it is, then. Should I meet you at the boarding house?" The church would be better. First Cherokee Baptist, the white building on Oak Street. They had reached the boarding house steps. Will touched the brim of his hat in farewell. "Until Sunday then, Miss Whitmore. Thank you for the company. You made this newcomer feel right welcome." "Thank you for lunch, Will." She watched him walk back toward the main street, his stride confident and unhurried. Mrs. Kowalski appeared at her elbow like a ghost. "Who was that?" the older woman asked, her eyes gleaming with curiosity. "His name is Will Vaughn. He is new in town, looking for ranch work. He seems nice. And he is not tall. No, he is not, but he smiled at you, I saw from the window." "He smiled at you like you were any other woman." "Yes," Loretta said softly. "He did." The rest of the week passed in a blur of sewing and anticipation. Loretta tried to keep her expectations low, tried to remind herself that Will was just being friendly, that he probably had not thought twice about their lunch or their planned walk. But despite her best efforts, she found herself counting down the days until Sunday. On Saturday evening, the posse returned. They had captured the bank robber, found him exactly where Loretta's map suggested he might be, holed up in a cave along Buffalo Creek with infection setting into his wound. Sheriff Coleman made a point of stopping by the boarding house to thank her again. "Your map was perfect, Miss Whitmore. We never would have found him so quickly without it. The town owes you a debt." "I am just glad no one else was hurt, Sheriff." "Still, you have a talent for this sort of thing. If you ever tire of sewing, maybe we could use you in some official capacity." It was meant as a compliment, but they both knew it was an empty one. The town would never actually hire a woman for such work, especially not one like her. Sunday morning dawned clear and warm. Loretta dressed in her best dress, a soft green cotton that she had made herself, fitted properly to her tall frame. She braided her brown hair and pinned it up, then looked at herself in the small mirror above her wash basin. She was not beautiful in the conventional sense. Her face was too angular, her features too strong, her body too long and tall. But for the first time in years, she allowed herself to wonder if maybe, just maybe, she did not need to be conventionally beautiful. Maybe being herself was enough. The church service seemed to drag on forever. Reverend Potter preached about patience and faith, and Loretta tried to practice both as the minutes crawled by. When the final hymn ended and the congregation began to disperse, she made her way outside quickly, before the other women could corner her with their questions and thinly veiled comments. Will was waiting under the oak tree across from the church, wearing clean clothes and with his hair freshly combed. When he saw her, his whole face lit up with that smile that made her heart do strange things. "Good morning, Miss Whitmore. You look lovely. Thank you. You are quite prompt. My mother taught me that being late is a sign of disrespect. She died when I was young, but that lesson stuck. They walked together out of town, following a path that led toward the river bottoms. The day was beautiful, with a breeze that kept the heat bearable and birds calling from every tree. "Tell me about these plants," Will said as they walked. "You mentioned your father taught you. What is this one?" He pointed to a cluster of purple flowers growing along the path. "That is ironweed. It blooms in late summer. Cherokee healers use it for stomach ailments." She knelt down, careful of her dress, and showed him the distinctive leaves. "And this here is wild bergamot. You can make tea from the leaves." They continued on, and she found herself sharing everything her father had taught her, pointing out useful plants and poisonous ones, showing him how to read the subtle signs of animal passage through the underbrush. Will listened with genuine interest, asking questions, remembering details. "You really know this land," he said with admiration. "This is knowledge worth having. My father thought so. Most people think it is odd for a woman to know such things. Most people are fools." They reached the river and followed it upstream to a spot where the water ran clear and shallow over smooth stones. Loretta sat on a large rock near the bank and Will settled onto a fallen log nearby. "Can I ask you something personal?" he said after a moment. "You can ask. Does it bother you? Being tall, I mean, and having people comment on it all the time." Loretta considered the question carefully. "It bothers me that it limits my life. Not the height itself, but what people think it means. I am the same person I would be if I were 5'4", but that version of me would have different opportunities, different treatment. That version of me would probably be married by now, maybe with children, certainly with more friends and social standing. It is not the inches that hurt. It is the doors they close." Will nodded slowly. "I understand that more than you might think. Being short as a man, well, it is not the same as being tall as a woman, but it comes with its own troubles. Especially out here in the West, where a man is expected to be big and tough and commanding. I have had to work twice as hard to be taken seriously, to prove I could do the same work as taller men. I have been passed over for jobs, laughed at by women I tried to court, called half man and worse. I am sorry. That is cruel. It is what it is, but it taught me something valuable. It taught me to see people for who they are, not what they look like. And when I look at you, Miss Whitmore, I see someone intelligent and capable, someone knowledgeable and interesting. The fact that you are tall just means I get a good view of your face when you smile." The words were so genuine, so free of artifice, that Loretta felt tears prick her eyes. She blinked them back quickly. "That is the kindest thing anyone has said to me in a very long time. Then people around here are blind, and I am lucky to be new in town." They spent the rest of the afternoon by the river, talking about everything and nothing. Will told her about growing up on his family's ranch, about the heartbreak of losing it to drought and debt, about his dreams of someday having land of his own again. Loretta told him about her father's death, about the lonely years since, about her small secret hopes that someday she might find a place where she truly belonged. The sun was starting to sink toward the western horizon when they finally headed back to town. They walked slowly, neither wanting the day to end. "Could I see you again?" Will asked as they approached the boarding house. "Maybe next Sunday or sooner if you would like." "I would like that very much." "What about Tuesday evening?" "I got hired on at the Morrison Ranch and I start tomorrow, but I will have Tuesday evening free. We could have supper at me's kitchen again." "That sounds perfect." He smiled at her again, that warm, genuine smile, and tipped his hat. "Until Tuesday, then." "Thank you for a wonderful afternoon, Loretta." The use of her first name sent a little thrill through her. "Thank you, Will." That night, lying in bed and listening to the sounds of the town settling into sleep, Loretta allowed herself to hope. It was dangerous, she knew. Hope had disappointed her before, had left her aching and alone. But Will was different. He saw her, really saw her, and he did not look away. Tuesday arrived slowly, each hour dragging like a week. Loretta worked on a dress order for the banker's wife, her fingers flying through the familiar motions while her mind wandered to Will. She wondered how his first day at the Morrison ranch had gone, if he was finding his place there, if he was thinking about her the way she was thinking about him. Evening finally came, and she changed into a clean dress, this one a soft blue that her father had always said brought out her eyes. She arrived at Me's kitchen to find Will already there, waiting outside with a bouquet of wildflowers clutched in one hand. "I picked these on my lunch break," he said, handing them to her with an almost shy expression. "Figured you would appreciate them since you know all their names." Loretta took the bouquet, touched beyond words. She identified wild roses, black-eyed Susans, and purple coneflowers, all tied together with a bit of twine. "They are beautiful. Thank you." Inside, Me greeted them with a knowing smile and seated them at the same table by the window. Over plates of chicken and dumplings, Will told her about the Morrison ranch, about the work of mending fences and moving cattle, about the other ranch hands and the Morrison family themselves. "Mr. Morrison asked me today if I planned on staying in the area long term," Will said. "I told him I hoped to. He said if I prove myself, there might be a more permanent position available, maybe even a chance to lease some of his land someday." "That is wonderful news. It is a start anyway, a chance to put down roots, maybe build something lasting." He paused, then added carefully, "Assuming there is a reason to put down roots here." Their eyes met across the table, and Loretta felt the weight of what he was not quite saying. It was too soon to speak of such things directly, but the implication hung in the air between them, full of possibility. "I think Tahlequah is a good place to build a future," she said softly, "for those brave enough to try." They began seeing each other regularly after that. Will would ride into town whenever his work allowed, and they would walk together, or share meals, or simply sit on the boarding house porch and talk until the stars came out. Loretta found herself laughing more than she had in years, found herself sharing thoughts and dreams she had kept locked away for so long. The town noticed, of course. The gossip spread like wildfire. Loretta Whitmore, the too-tall spinster, was being courted by a short cowboy from Texas. The reactions ranged from amused to scandalized. "It is not natural," Mrs. Henderson declared loudly at the general store one morning. "A woman should be able to look up to her man, literally and figuratively." "I think they make a sweet couple," Me said firmly, surprising everyone. "They are both good people who deserve happiness. The rest is just inches." "Easy for you to say," another woman muttered. "Creek people do not have the same standards." Me's expression hardened. "Creek people have the good sense to judge folks by their character, not their height." "Maybe you should try it." Loretta heard about the exchange from Mrs. Kowalski, who had been present for the whole thing. "That Me, she has spine," Mrs. Kowalski said approvingly. "She told those biddies what is what. Good for her. Good for you too, Loretta. You deserve someone who looks at you like that cowboy does." "How does he look at me?" Loretta asked, though she thought she knew. "Like you hung the moon and stars. Like you are the most precious thing he ever saw. That is how a man should look at a woman he loves." Love. The word hung in Loretta's mind long after Mrs. Kowalski left. Was it love? Could it be after such a short time? But when she examined her feelings honestly, she could not deny the truth. She was falling in love with Will Vaughn, with his easy smile and his kind words and the way he never once made her feel too tall or too much or too anything. One evening in late August, nearly 2 months after they first met, Will asked her to go for a ride. He had borrowed a gentle mare from the ranch, and they rode out to a spot he had discovered, a high meadow that overlooked the Illinois River Valley. The sunset painted the sky in shades of orange and purple, and the first stars were beginning to appear. They sat on a blanket Will had brought, close enough that their shoulders touched. The horses grazed nearby. Content. "Loretta," Will said, his voice serious. "I need to tell you something." Her heart stuttered with sudden fear. This was where he would tell her it had all been a mistake, that he had reconsidered, that the gossip had finally gotten to him. "All right," she managed to say. "I am in love with you." The words were so unexpected, so different from what she had braced herself for, that she could only stare at him. "I have been in love with you since that first day, I think," he continued, the words tumbling out now like he had been holding them back for too long. "When I looked up and saw you standing there with your thread spools scattered everywhere, and you had this look on your face like you were bracing for something terrible, and all I could think was that you were the most striking woman I had ever seen. Not despite your height, not regardless of it, but just you, all of you, exactly as you are. Will, I know it has only been a couple of months, I know people are talking, and I know this is not conventional. But I have never been conventional, and neither have you, and I think that is perfect. I think we are perfect. At least we could be, if you feel even a fraction of what I feel." Loretta found her voice finally, found the courage to speak the truth that had been growing in her heart. "I love you too. I have tried not to, tried to protect myself, but it is impossible. You make me feel seen and valued, and like myself is enough. You look at me and smile like I am exactly right just as I am. I love you for that, and for 100 other reasons." Will let out a breath he seemed to have been holding and grinned so wide it looked almost painful. "Thank God. I was terrified you would say I was foolish or moving too fast. Maybe we are both foolish. Maybe we are moving too fast, but I do not care." He reached for her hand, lacing his fingers through hers. "Loretta Whitmore, would you consider marrying me? I do not have much to offer yet. I am still just a ranch hand with dreams bigger than my bank account, but I promise I will work every day to build a good life for us. I will never make you feel less than you are, and I will stand by you no matter what anyone says." Tears spilled down Loretta's cheeks, but for once they were happy tears. "Yes, yes, I will marry you." Will whooped with joy, a sound that echoed across the valley and sent the horses skittering nervously. Then he was kissing her, and she was kissing him back, and the height difference did not matter at all because they were sitting down and his arms were around her, and everything felt absolutely right. They were married 6 weeks later in the First Cherokee Baptist Church, with me and Mrs. Kowalski as witnesses and Sheriff Coleman giving Loretta away in her father's absence. Loretta wore a dress she had made herself, cream-colored with lace at the collar, and Will wore his best shirt and a vest he had borrowed from Mr. Morrison. The church was not full. Some people stayed away in protest of the unusual match, but those who came did so with genuine warmth, and me cried openly through the entire ceremony. Reverend Potter pronounced them man and wife, and when Will kissed his bride, he had to stand on his toes while she bent down slightly, and there was a smattering of laughter from the pews. But it was kind laughter, the kind that celebrates something sweet rather than mocks it. They moved into a small cabin on the Morrison Ranch, a 2-room structure that Mr. Morrison offered them at reduced rent. It was not much, but it was theirs, and Loretta set about making it a home with the same careful attention she gave to sewing. Will proved himself invaluable at the ranch, and by winter, Mr. Morrison offered him a permanent position as foreman with a substantial increase in wages. The offer included the option to lease, and eventually purchase 40 acres on the northeastern corner of the ranch property. "It is good land," Mr. Morrison told them over dinner at the main house. "Creek runs through it. Soil is decent for crops if you want to try your hand at farming, and there is enough graze for a small herd. I know you have been saving, Will. This could be your chance to build something of your own." Will looked at Loretta and she nodded. They had discussed this possibility many times during their long evening talks, planning their future, dreaming their dreams. "We accept," Will said. "Thank you, Mr. Morrison. You will not regret this." They spent the winter planning and saving every penny they could. Loretta continued her seamstress work, and Will took on extra projects around the ranch. By spring of 1879, they had saved enough for a down payment, and the land was officially theirs to lease with an option to buy. Building a house was hard work. Loretta helped with everything, her height proving to be an advantage when it came to raising beams and reaching high places. Some of the other ranch hands pitched in on weekends, and slowly, a modest but sturdy two-room house took shape on a rise overlooking the creek. "This is ours," Loretta said one evening as they stood outside the nearly completed house, watching the sun set over their land. "I never thought I would have this. A home, a husband, land of my own." "Our own," Will corrected, putting his arm around her waist. "Everything I have is yours, Loretta. Everything I am is yours." She leaned down to kiss the top of his head. "I am the luckiest woman in the territory." "I would argue I am the lucky one, but I do not want to fight with my wife." He smiled up at her, that same smile that had first captured her heart nearly a year ago. "How about we are both lucky? I can accept that." They moved into the new house in May, and Loretta planted a garden beside it, using the knowledge her father had taught her to choose plants that would thrive in the Oklahoma soil. By summer, they had tomatoes and beans, squash and corn, enough to feed themselves and sell the surplus in town. Life settled into a rhythm of work and contentment. Will managed the Morrison Ranch and slowly built up their own small herd of cattle on their leased land. Loretta kept sewing but now also helped with the ranch work, proving herself capable of everything from breaking horses to delivering calves. The gossip about their unusual marriage eventually died down, replaced by a grudging respect. Even Mrs. Henderson had to admit, when Loretta delivered a beautifully sewn wedding dress for her daughter Alice, that the tall woman had done quite well for herself after all. In the fall of 1879, Loretta discovered she was pregnant. She told Will one evening after supper as they sat on their porch watching the stars emerge. "Are you certain?" Will asked, his voice full of wonder. "As certain as I can be. Me has been through this herself, and she says all the signs are there." Will stood up and pulled her to her feet, or as upright as she would get from the rocking chair, and spun her around despite the height difference making it comically awkward. "We are going to have a baby. A son or daughter. A family. Are you happy?" Loretta asked, though she could see the answer in his eyes. "Happy does not begin to cover it. I am overwhelmed. I am terrified. I am grateful beyond words. So am I, all of those things. The pregnancy was not easy." Loretta was sick for the first 3 months, and her height made her center of gravity even more precarious as she grew larger. But Will was attentive and patient, taking over the heavier chores and making sure she rested. Their son was born in May of 1880 on a warm morning with me acting as midwife and Mrs. Kowalski hovering anxiously in the kitchen. The labor was long and difficult, but when Will finally heard the baby's first cry, he burst into the bedroom with tears streaming down his face. "You have a son," Me announced, placing the bundled infant in Loretta's arms. "A healthy, perfect son. They named him James Thomas Vaughn after both their fathers. He was a long baby which made Loretta laugh through her exhaustion. "He is going to be tall," she said. "Look at those legs." "Let him be whatever height he grows to," Will said, touching his son's tiny hand with reverence. "We will love him regardless." As James grew, it became clear he had indeed inherited his mother's height. By his first birthday, he was in clothes meant for children 6 months older. But Will and Loretta raised him to be confident in himself, to know that his worth was not measured in inches either direction. The years passed with the sweet inevitability of a good life. Their cattle herd grew, and by 1883 they had saved enough to purchase their land outright from Mr. Morrison. 2 years after that, Loretta gave birth to a daughter they named Sarah, who came into the world with her father's blue eyes and her mother's long limbs. The town of Tahlequah changed around them as the Indian Territory evolved. There were still injustices, still prejudices, still the complicated dynamics of Cherokee and white settlers sharing space. But in their small corner of the world, Will and Loretta built something that felt like peace. On their 10th wedding anniversary in 1889, they added a third room to their house and bought 20 more acres adjacent to their property. James was 9 years old and already shooting up toward his mother's height. Sarah was 4 and showed every sign of being just as tall. "Do you ever regret it?" Loretta asked Will one night as they lay in bed, listening to the sound of rain on their roof. "Regret what?" "Marrying someone so tall, having to deal with all the stares and comments for so many years." Will propped himself up on one elbow to look at her in the darkness. "Loretta Vaughn, in 10 years of marriage, you have not once given me reason to regret anything. You are my partner, my best friend, the love of my life. The fact that you are tall just means I have to reach up to kiss you, and that is a small price for everything you are. I love you," she whispered. "I love you too. I loved you from the moment I looked up and smiled at you in that general store, and I will love you until the day I die." They fell asleep in each other's arms, as they had done for thousands of nights before, and would do for thousands more to come. James grew to be 6 feet 4 inches tall, the same height his maternal grandfather had been. He became a teacher, using his education to help Cherokee children learn to navigate both worlds they inhabited in the changing territory. Sarah grew to 6 feet even and became a veterinarian, one of the first women in the state to do so after Oklahoma gained statehood in 1907. Will and Loretta were grandparents by then, James having married a Cherokee woman named Ada and Sarah having wed a veterinary surgeon she met during her training in Kansas City. They had 4 grandchildren between them, various heights, various interests, all raised with the understanding that they were exactly right just as they were. In 1912, at the age of 58, Loretta published a book about the native plants of Oklahoma, using all the knowledge her father had taught her and the decades she had spent observing and learning. It was not a bestseller, but it was used by botanists and naturalists throughout the region, and that was more than enough. Will expanded their ranch to include 3 hired hands and nearly 200 head of cattle. He was respected throughout the region as a fair boss and a skilled cattleman. And if anyone still remembered that he had once been the short cowboy who married the too tall woman, they kept it to themselves. On a warm evening in June of 1925, Will and Loretta sat on their porch watching the sunset, as they had done thousands of times before. They were both in their 70s now, their bodies marked by age and hard work, but their hands were still entwined, and their love was still as strong as it had been 47 years earlier. "You remember the first time we came out here?" Will asked. "To this spot before we built the house?" "I remember everything," Loretta said. "I remember every moment from the day we met. When I looked up and saw you in that general store, I knew my life was about to change. I did not know how exactly, but I knew it. I thought you were strange, Loretta admitted with a smile. A man who did not seem to care that I was taller than him. It was so unusual I did not know what to make of it. I am glad I was strange enough to catch your attention. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun paint the Oklahoma sky in shades of gold and red. Somewhere in the house behind them, their granddaughter was playing piano, the notes drifting out through the open windows. "We built something good here," Will said quietly. "A good life, a good family. I have no regrets." "Neither do I, not a single one." Will squeezed her hand gently. "Thank you for taking a chance on a short cowboy from Texas. Thank you for looking up and smiling at a too tall woman in a general store. You were never too tall. You were always exactly right." Loretta turned to look at her husband, at the man who had seen her when no one else would, who had loved her without reservation or condition, who had built a life with her that exceeded anything she had dared to dream. "So were you," she said. "So were you." They watched the sun sink below the horizon together, their hands joined, their hearts full, their life together a testament to the simple truth that love has nothing to do with inches and everything to do with seeing someone truly and choosing them anyway. Will and Loretta Vaughn lived another decade together on their ranch in Oklahoma, surrounded by family and the land they had worked so hard to build. When Will passed in 1935 at the age of 81, Loretta mourned deeply, but without regret. They had been given 53 years together, which was more than either had expected when a too tall woman and a shorter cowboy first met in a general store in Tahlequah. Loretta lived 3 more years, writing letters to her grandchildren and great-grandchildren, tending her garden and walking the land she and Will had made their own. She told their story to anyone who would listen, wanting the younger generations to understand that love could be found in the most unexpected places, that height and convention and other people's opinions mattered far less than courage and genuine connection. When she died peacefully in her sleep in 1938 at 84, she was buried beside Will on a hill overlooking the creek, under a sky as wide and blue as the one that had witnessed their first kiss so many years before. Their descendants continued to work the ranch for generations, and the story of how Will and Loretta met became family legend. The too tall woman and the cowboy who looked up and smiled at her, who built a life together against all odds, who proved that love was measured not in inches, but in moments, in choices, in the daily decision to see each other truly and love each other anyway. In the general store in Tahlequah, now modernized but still standing, there is a small plaque near the entrance that commemorates the meeting of Will Vaughn and Loretta Whitmore in 1878. It reads simply, "Love knows no height, it only knows the heart."